now that I'm older, in fact, I respect more new hires that really ask, because it shows interest, it shows that they want to learn. And so, it turns out that my perception of they're going to think that I'm underqualified, in fact, was totally the opposite. Now I see it as, okay, they're curious, they want to learn. Let me spend the time and teach you.
That's podcast. Tap in. That's it. Subscribe.
This is the STU Street Podcast, episode 17. I am your host, Sam Morra, and today I'm sitting down with Raul Heraud. He is a venture capitalist and private equity investments professional with significant experience in both traditional and decentralized finance. Raul is a true citizen of the world, as he has worked in 11 different countries and fluently speaks 6 different languages. His work experience has given him a global perspective on the field of business and has allowed him to apply his financial knowledge in a wide variety of contexts. Currently, Raul works as managing partner at Token Tactics, where he invests, educates, and advises on all things blockchain. So Raul, I mentioned that the fact that you have been all over the world, but interestingly enough, before coming to American University, where you studied as an undergrad, you trained as a mechanical engineering student in Lille, France. What was this experience like, and what brought you there? Like, where are you originally from that brought you to France?
Sure. So I'm originally from Costa Rica. That's where I grew up and went to school. And actually, it was completely unexpected. In fact, our school year ends in December. And so my plan was to attend American University in the fall in the US in August, September. And so I convinced my parents to let me take a trip to Europe. I had been on exchange when I was in high school once to France. And I decided it would be an interesting experience and a good use of those 6 months that I have, that gap. Completely unexpectedly, I went, loved it, started talking to students, professors, and ended up getting accepted into a prep school there for engineering. So a 3-week trip turned into a 3-year plus trip.
So that's interesting because you said you plan on going to American, which you eventually did. But your pathway here, you went to prep school for mechanical engineering. What pivoted your pathway to study international finance at American, and kind of what brought you to that decision, and what made you comfortable with it?
Sure. Again, this is going to be a recurring theme in our conversation, is just chance, life, opportunity, things happen. So I transferred to the US to be closer to my family. And when I transferred to the US, to American University, it turns out they don't have an engineering program, because originally that's not what I was going to study. And so while being there, what I did is joined one of the dual degree programs that allowed me to do one major at American University and a second major at a different school. And that obviously second major was going to be the engineering. And so I decided that business would be a good combination, and this feedback from mentors, and that engineering and business usually go well together. Then it got to my senior year, and it turns out that my advisor had told me that a course that I didn't need to take at the beginning, I did have to take, and basically led to a situation where I had to choose either staying at American and finishing business or transferring over to the other school to do engineering. So I had to pick between the two. Interestingly enough, what happened is I went home for the holidays. While being at home, I lost a letter they give you when you're an international student that goes with your visa and that you need to go back into the US. I lost it, and I wrote to both schools saying, I need a copy of this letter. And this was, mind you, not too long after 9/11. So they were very strict in controlling all the paperwork. And so I wrote to both schools, and in Costa Rica at the time, and still now, the streets have no name, right? So addresses, this is very idiosyncratic of my country, but so addresses are from, the post office of whatever town, 100 meters east, 25 meters north, second house on the right with a palm tree in front, right? Literally, that's how it worked. And so I wrote to both schools and said, I need this letter. They asked me for my address. And of course, when I sent it back, they said, we can't send an official student visa letter to 300 meters from there and 25 meters from the other side, right? And so I explained to them, and I said the other options are PO boxes, which they didn't do. And I just said, you know what, whichever I-20, which is the number of, the name of the letter, whichever I-20 gets there first, that's the school that I'm going to. And American got there first.
That's fascinating. So just trying to wrap that all back, it was your senior year, and this happens very frequently, more than it really should, where an advisor tells you one thing early on in college that doesn't end up being true. Being able to plan for the unexpected, was this a trait that you developed, or how overwhelming were these experiences, or were you very kind of stoic in the moment? Because there was a lot that you had to deal with.
Very overwhelming, very overwhelming. I think that my tolerance for uncertainty and for change comes from life just forcing me to learn it that way. I mean, it's something I wish I would have been more comfortable with when I was younger. I think that at the time, when these things happened, it just felt like the world around me was, collapsing, and I felt this huge pressure and weight. And now looking back on it, I realized that it wasn't that important, but it definitely felt very important at the time. Of course, it shaped my path. But I can't say that I sat there, and enjoyed my summer and didn't care. It was definitely stressful. But sometimes I think that it's something that, in life you have to learn to deal with is uncertainty. It's learning how to be patient and just letting things kind of take care of themselves, so far as you've done everything that you can, of course.
And making the decision that, okay, whichever I-20 arrives here first, that's the school I'm going with. That's a big commitment. But at the same time, it's allowing yourself to say, okay, I did everything in my power here, and now I can't affect this any further, so allow myself to pull back. That's a trait that's very hard to develop. And I'm guessing that was a big learning experience for you. But at that point in time, once you reach kind of the end of the pathway with that situation, did you become more at peace, or did it leave you with kind of a different perspective on how you handle things?
Sure. So, it's the truth is, I didn't have a choice in the matter, right? Because I needed that letter to go back. So not being, I guess, in control can be somewhat liberating. Again, knowing that you did what you had to do. At the same time, it can be very stressful, right? We've all had to submit college applications and take standardized tests where we don't know, what the results or an application, the result is out of our hands. Of course, it's nerve-wracking. But it really got to the point, let me share another part of what happened is I originally thought, so the other school was the University of Southern California, USC. So it was really a big change, right? It was West Coast, East Coast. It was, really a very, very different experience. And I decided to rent an Airbnb and a car and go to LA and check it out. While I was waiting, I could, I didn't have my student visa, but I had my tourist visa, which, as a foreigner, and in Costa Rica, they give you for 10 years. And it's just, I bought a ticket to LA, rented a car, rented an Airbnb. My mom drove me to the airport while I was there and checking in. They asked for my I-20, and I said, well, I'm not going in as a student, I'm going in as a tourist. They checked my tourist visa, and it turns out it had expired, right? It happens, and I was 21 at the time. So it had been renewed when I was, or 20, so renewed when I was 10 years old, right? It's nothing I had even thought about.
Yeah.
I had to call my mom and say, come back and get me because I'm not going to LA. So again, it was just a series of events that just were very random and just happened. And one of the things I think I've learned from all of this and talking about this theme of managing uncertainty is to go with the flow, in the sense that, often life kind of puts things either in an easy path or in a harder path. And if you find yourself kind of fighting something constantly, it sometimes means that's just not, that's life's way of telling you, hey, maybe this is not the way to do it. It doesn't mean you don't fight for things. It doesn't mean you make an effort. It's just that sometimes, mind and gut, let's say, have different feelings, and we are very much trained to listen to our mind and rationalize decisions. And, as we'll continue going through my journey, you'll see that a lot of the times just life pushed me towards gut, and I had to settle the mind.
Yeah. I think that's a battle that everyone has to kind of learn the balance of over time. And so following your time in undergraduate, you gained significant experience in Latin America. First, you began in Ecuador with thesis and thesis, where you did extensive capital and debt restructuring. You actually directed the recovery and restructuring of 200 million in outstanding debt for the liquidation of Phil and Blanco. And for those who don't know, prior to the economic crisis of 1998, they were the largest bank in Ecuador. Therefore, my question is two-parted. First, coming out of your undergraduate years, did this project seem daunting to you, as it is a very large corporation, obviously, going through a tremendously catastrophic time, and there's a lot being thrown at you? And secondly, the economic crisis Ecuador was facing at the time pushed an already poor country into desperate times. It eventually led Ecuador to adopt USD as its official currency, and there was immense migration out of the country. So did this experience give you greater real-world perspective on the economy and even its vulnerabilities?
100%. I mean, it was, it's very different when you read about things in a textbook, or when you do research, or maybe create a financial model as part of a project or for homework. It's very different than when you're dealing with real life, of course. So to answer your first question, yes, it felt daunting. It felt daunting because, again, you have the pressure of being in the real world, and, you're not sure that you are equipped and that you have the knowledge to do these things, right? So, I think it's a normal kind of initial reaction. However, one of the things that I learned through this experience is, one, to ask for help, right? So to not be afraid to ask for help. I learned that one the hard way, right? So one of the tasks that I had to do, I decided I would figure it out. And I didn't want to ask for help, because I figured, well, they probably hired me because they think I know this. I spent quite a bit of time and effort trying to get that done. Turns out I did something that was completely different to what had to be done, right? So not only did I waste my 2 weeks, but also I delayed the project because they were expecting me to deliver something completely different. And, and that would have been solved just by asking, and saying, well, I'm not sure I know how to do this, or, what is the outcome going to be used for, so that I make sure that, whatever output of my work is useful. How do I do this, right? I think that it's one of the things that when you come out of undergrad, you're afraid to ask. And it's super important. Now that I'm older, in fact, I respect more new hires that really ask, because it shows interest. It shows that they want to learn. And so, it turns out that my perception of they're going to think that I'm underqualified, in fact, was totally the opposite. Now I see it as, okay, they're curious, they want to learn. Let me spend the time and teach you. So that helped me mitigate that. And then once I started, learning what I had to do, I realized that, in fact, I did learn a lot of this stuff, right? That a lot of this stuff came from the classes that I had taken in school. And so that helped me mitigate a little bit of kind of that anxiety. And that's how I got the ball rolling. So first, I made the mistake of not asking, learned from that. From there on, I became a little bit of a compulsive asker. But it was important to kind of make sure that whatever I was doing was aligned with expectations. And so, yeah, that's definitely advice for people starting their, their first jobs or even internships, is questions are not a bad thing. They show interest. So that, to answer your first one. The second one, absolutely, it gave me more sensitivity towards international markets. It made me realize that, when I studied business, I did so in the US, and a lot of the case studies, a lot of the regulation, a lot of the approaches, system frameworks were very appropriate, but some of them didn't translate well to non-developed markets. And so that was definitely eye-opening for me. It made me realize that, you know, it's a big world, and that macroeconomic, political, social conditions, religious, you know, affiliations have an influence on how people think, behave, do business, etc. And so, you know, I would say it enhanced my curiosity. I was already someone that was very much, you know, because of growing up in Costa Rica and then studying in France and going to the US, I was already very much, let's say, curious about the world, but this really allowed me to see it firsthand. So absolutely, it enhanced my sensitivities, but also interest in you know, the world outside of maybe the US and Europe, which is what we hear the most about.
I think one word that I'd love to draw out what you said is curious. And that ties back to a few things that you said, especially amongst young employees and people coming out of college. The need to be curious is vital, because that drives not only your knowledge growth, but also how you're viewed within an organization. So as you said before, people are somewhat afraid to open themselves up and show their limitations, because then they might believe it represents their underqualification. But what you point out is, in reality, it shows that they're willing to grow and they're willing to learn. And by asking people that have been in the industry for a while and within your firm, that's firsthand knowledge that you can gain right there. So it not only helps yourself, but it helps the organization. So now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and we'll get back to kind of the chronological order. But in your position now, where you're no longer an entry level employee, but rather on the other end of things, um, how do you handle that from a management perspective? Do you give feedback more frequently, or do you try to kind of coerce questions out of employees, or how do you handle it?
Sure. So I mean, 100%, it's a case by case, right? Everybody's different. But the truth is, I do look into that, right? So what I thought when I was in my early 20s and starting my career was a weakness, in fact, now I look at as a strength, right? So I do tend to observe, you know, the people that come in, who asks questions, you know, who challenges things, right? In obviously respectful and in a business way, but the reason people are hired is because they are considered smart. They are considered that they can bring something to the table. Rarely will you hire someone in undergrad that you're not expecting to train, that you're not expecting to spend some time on helping them get up to speed. So, you know, one of the things that I realize now is that it's, as a new hire, it's expected that you will require training, right? So we go back to the same asking questions. It is expected that you will get there and know, quote unquote, nothing, right? Because a lot of the stuff is learned on the job. You know, and the truth is, when we're in college, a lot of the classes we study to pass, and you know, then we forget about. And so maybe I don't know, the accounting that you took in your sophomore or junior year all of a sudden comes into play. Right? I remember building models where I all of a sudden had to do a depreciation table for, you know, power plant and equipment, so for fixed assets. And I knew I had studied it. I knew I had hated it, but I didn't remember it, right? And so that made me kind of make that connection of, I wish I would have kind of had this real world experience sooner to realize the value of what I was learning, right? It was more than just an annoying kind of make sure that at the end of the day, your balance sheet balances so you pass the accounting test. It's actually stuff that you'll have to use. But going back to what you were saying, so yeah, I mean, I think that everyone in the industry is aware of the fact that new hires require training. It should be a part of any onboarding program. And how do I handle it? Well, you know, I try to create a safe and comfortable environment for people to ask questions. But I also don't force people to do it. I think that it's a bit of kind of letting people show, you know, their natural curiosity, because that says a lot. And more often than not, the people that ask questions and are more engaged end up doing better in terms of the work they produce, but also in terms of their career.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I like the fact that you give them the space to do so. So going back to your journey, after about a year and a half with Thesis and Terrace, you joined Bain Capital Ventures, now Mesoamerica. Bain was the leading PE and M&A advisory firm in Central America at the time and gave you exposure to a variety of opportunities in various nations. What do you believe you drew from this experience that contributed to your global strategy, as well as just your investment strategy as a whole?
Sure. Listen, Mesoamerica was probably the best school that I ever attended. It was really there, a little bit of what I was talking about, building the model, and it was really there where I learned to do what I do. Yes, of course, research skills from school were very useful, but once you start seeing things being done in real life, aside from obviously Filambanco, but this was M&A deals, this was private equity, and this was consulting. And, it's a very interesting kind of opportunity that I had, because little known fact is that Bain's first office in Latin America, ex-Brazil, or in Spanish-speaking Latin America, was in Costa Rica. And it was founded by, among other people, Harry Strachan, who was the founder of Bain Capital worldwide. And so I was very lucky to be mentored by, someone that is a brilliant mind, and, Harvard MBA, Harvard JD, Harvard PhD, professor of Harvard Business School. I mean, founder of Bain Capital. He's an amazing professional. And so that, in fact, was a little bit of what I described, and where I learned that was a very safe environment to ask questions. It was, an environment where I think, in my experience in finance, the egos were the lowest, the hierarchy was also the flattest, and it was really a comfortable environment. And I think a lot of that had to do with the culture of the people they hired. They were very, very selective. My selection process took about a year and something, which is why I ended up going to Ecuador. I applied for both jobs at the same time, and the process took a very long time with Mesoamerica. So that was an amazing experience. It allowed me, like I said, to do a hybrid of, I didn't know it was normal until I got to business school, but I got to do consulting with Bain. I got to do M&A, and I got to do private equity. At the time, I thought it was normal to kind of be in a shop like that. And I also got to travel a lot around Latin America, particularly the northern part of South America and Central America. And again, going back to what we were talking about before, it allowed me to see very different macroeconomic conditions, different industries. It allowed me to see the relationship between government and, large players in countries, the power balance that exists as well, and how money sometimes can move more than it should, right? So it was a very eye-opening experience into, how the real world works, with the nice things and the not so nice things. But it was amazing. And it was there, like I said, where I sat down and scratched my head. I used to have hair back then, but scratched my head and thought to myself, oof, I know I went through this in college, but I just don't remember.
So you mentioned the fact that this experience kind of acted as the best school you could have went towards, and it accelerated your knowledge base just exponentially. You're involved in not only consulting, but M&A, and just everything at once. You're fully immersed. Ultimately, however, in 2006, you decided to go back to school to get your MBA. So you spent 2 years at Wharton, where you specialized in private equity. Wharton is one of the most prestigious and well-respected institutions in the world. But nonetheless, what were your drivers to go back to school, especially after you said you had such a great experience at Bain?
Sure. It felt like a natural progression of my career. But the truth is, it's a combination of things, right? So when I graduated from American University, I graduated as salutatorian, which means I gave the speech at graduation, right? And that was something that I did as a thank you to my parents. And, it was 6-month selection process, and it was complicated. And I gave the speech, and it was interesting. A lot of it had to do with what we're talking about. So cultures and seeing the world from outer space. And The speech had quotes from astronauts about, how the limitations that we create are human made. And the day before, the Columbia, the space shuttle exploded coming back into the Earth, right? So everyone died. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And immediately they called me from the president's office to say, you can't talk about that anymore because it's, this just happened. As you can imagine, I was partying with my friends. I was in no state to rewrite a speech that had taken 6 months to develop. And I had a little bit of an aha moment, and I just added to it, in light of recent events, to the whole speech. So, when I got to that part, I just said, in light of recent events, I would like to share with you quotes from astronauts as they saw the Earth from outer space. And so it all of a sudden became very current, right? And but anyways, at the end of the speech, one of my finance professors approached me and said, hey, there's a lot of schools that have masters in finance that are not MBAs. And I'm sure you could use one of those back doors to get into a great school. I remember when he told me that, I thought to myself, back door? What? So from that moment on, and I think it was a little bit of ego, and in spite of him saying that, I said, not back door, and definitely through the MBA program. And so very early on, I started researching programs. I knew I had to take the GMAT. So, I got that out of the way, I think when I was still in Ecuador. And, that was something that was already in my plans. I knew that in order to advance in my career and in order to have a little bit more of a global stage, I wanted to get that experience of the MBA. Now, at the time, I wanted to do a JD MBA. So I wanted to go to law school and business school at the same time. And I spoke to Harry, my former boss that I mentioned, and he's a JD MBA from Harvard. And he said, why do you want to do the JD? And I said, well, I think that it's very important to know about law, contract law, and labor law, and, all the things that affect the businesses that we touch, right? Because we have to deal a lot with not only the finance side of things, but the restructuring of business side of things. And that means a lot of interacting with lawyers and, of course, during the transactions as well. And he said to me, well, listen, if you want to be a financier that knows about law, then take elective classes like contracts and, because if you do a JD MBA, you're going to be a lawyer that knows about finance. And to prove his point, he assigned me to a post-arbitration, a post-acquisition arbitration, that took a year and a half. And I had to work with the lawyers to help them prepare the briefs for this. It took about a year. And once I saw what the first year of preparation for an arbitration was, I decided immediately I did not want to do the JD. But it was fascinating, right? It was fascinating to work hand. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about reading fine print. I'm one of those people that does, because that was an arbitration worth, I think it was $1.2 billion because of the word such, right? And so there was a paragraph that said losses arising from misrepresentation, so overstatement of assets or understatement of liabilities, such losses. And it wasn't clear if such meant the whole paragraph or that sentence, right? And that made me realize the importance of, the nuances of contracts. So yeah, that was, it was that experience that made me realize, okay, I definitely don't want to do JD MBA. At that time, I had realized already that my passion had to do with cultures, with a little bit of what we're talking about, right? What does the rest of the world look like? And I found at the University of Pennsylvania, along with the MBA from Wharton, a dual degree program called the Lauder program. It was founded by Estee Lauder and the Lauder makeup company. And it combines the MBA with an MA in international studies. It was created with the purpose of, at the time, what they would say in the Lauder company is that they would find a lot of very qualified graduates from the top business schools, but very few of them had international sensitivities. And being a global company, they needed people that would become leaders in different parts of the world. And so they started this program in which you kind of, throughout the MBA, not only do, of course, the material for the MA, but spend a lot of time in the countries where this language is spoken. And the school connects you with business leaders, politicians, etc. The idea being that then you kind of become a leader in that region as well, right? So you have to be somewhat fluent in the language, and the choices, I believe, are French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Chinese, Japanese, Russian. And I think now they have a global track program for people that already speak more than 2 languages. And so the idea is to take you from, let's say, a conversational level to a professional fluency level. And so that program, I remember the first time I found it when I was doing research late at night, right? I was working in the Bain job and it was very, very busy. But I remember it was, like a movie where you hear angels sing and the light comes down. And when I found that MBA with that MA International Studies, with that amount of international travel experience, hands-on experience, I was sold. And that's what made me want to go there.
It's nice how you're able to kind of filter down where you wanted to be and what you wanted to get out of the program. And it seems like that real world experience, especially with the arbitration, shifted your perspective a little bit. So looking at that, your expectations going into the program versus what it truly was when you're a part of it, was there a big disparity between the two, or was it on par with what you found in your research?
There was disparity, but it was positive. It was better than I thought it would be. It was a lot of work, of course, as you can imagine. Just the MBA at Wharton in finance is very demanding. And when you add on top of that, another master's degree from an Ivy League school, of course, it was a lot of work, but it was a great environment, right? It was really a safe place to learn. There were people from all over the world with all sorts of backgrounds. And, it was very different from the experience in undergraduate, where most of the time a professor tells you something and you believe it at face value, versus going into graduate school where you have people that, and I was very much on the lower end of years of career, but you had people that had, many, many years of their careers, and you had brain surgeons, you had Air Force pilots, right? You had people that had been in intelligence agencies. You had people, of course, from, more traditional investment banking and backgrounds, but you had people from all over the world. And I remember once when I was visiting, before I even started the program, I got sat in a class. I went to visit campus, and there was a person from a very well-known internet giant. I won't say the name, but they were talking about their policy in terms of free speech and just a little bit about their policies. And at some point, one of the guys in the audience, so one of the students, raised his hand and he said, "Well, Mr. Whatever, I worked for your competitor for 7 years, and we both know that what you're saying is not how it really works. So how about you start telling everyone the truth of what happens behind the scenes?" To me, that was, there was a gasp in the class, but to me, that was like, wow, okay, this is where I want to be. I want to be in a place where the professor really, of course, they're incredibly smart and have a lot of experience to be there. But what they do is they facilitate the conversation. And you have a lot of people that have a lot of input to give, right? And sometimes some is more valuable than others. Sometimes you have nothing to say and just listen. But it was really refreshing to kind of, instead of just looking at a textbook, to kind of hear perspectives of people that had been involved in these situations and that had some feedback, right? And you inevitably start reaching situations that are not as black and white as sometimes the case studies that we would get were, right? So if you want to do business in a large country where everybody pays bribes to do business, what do you do, right? Because it's very easy to say, well, ethically, no, you don't pay bribes, and you leave the country. Sure, is that the best for your shareholders? You don't know. Do you have to deal? And mind you, I'm not talking about anything that would be illegal in the country, and maybe bribes is a wrong example, but there's a lot of stuff that happens that is just part of business, and that's reality. And so, you're faced with the decision of, I'll do this, I won't do that. You're faced with the decision of where your limits are, and I think if you work only in developed countries, this is very clear, but if you don't, it's not, right? And I remember being involved in transactions in Central America where we couldn't do a merger and acquisition. In fact, I remember a specific one of a merger because of labor laws. And, the owner of the conglomerate that was doing the acquisition asked us, what do we need the law to say? And 3 months later, the law had been changed to our advantage to say what we needed it to say, right? So there's countries where there's power like that. And so being around people that were so smart, that had so much to contribute and such vast experience was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating.
It seems like a lot of your environments you defined by the people that you were surrounded with, and the positive things you were able to garner from them came from those bosses or from those colleagues or from those classmates that really pushed you and showed you different avenues to take. So following your time at Wharton, you joined Merrill Lynch in May of 2008 as a senior associate in their global PE group. You moved to Brazil, yet again, part of your global journey, where you were part of the PE arm in charge of Latin American investments. Just a few months later, the 2008 financial crisis resulted in Merrill Lynch being acquired by BOA. What were the tensions like during this time, and how did your experience in the liquidation process of Phil and Blanco compare to being inside of a bank going through this near catastrophic experience?
Sure. Listen, those were crazy times, right? It was something completely unprecedented. I was extremely excited because I had, true to kind of what I wanted to do, landed, private equity job, which is very hard to get, in a big institution, which I was, wanting to be a part of in Brazil, which was my focus when I did the MA in international relations, right? So that was my focus in the law program. So I was really kind of fulfilling, everything that I wanted to get out of the experience or past the experience of grad school. And this absolutely rocked the finance world. It was very difficult. It was very stressful, particularly in the case of Merrill Lynch, where, while it was being purchased by Bank of America, they changed CEOs every 2 weeks for a few months, right? And so, a new CEO would come in and say, emerging markets are absolutely an avenue for growth for Bank of America, and we would say, oh, great, all right, we're going to get to keep our job. Then you have a new CEO that would come in and say, alternative investments are not something that we need to focus on. We need to restructure the core of Bank of America, right? So then we'd be like, oh, all right, crap, and this went on for a few months. It was horrible. I mean, I won't lie. Mental health, even physical health, because it's and it's one of the things that comes with being an expat all the time, is that you uprooted your life, right? And you moved to a new country. And it's not only if that job goes away, is that most of the time your visa is dependent on that job, right? Mm-hmm. So if your job goes away, if you don't have a new sponsor, if you don't find a new job in whatever window of time they give you, you have to leave, right? So it's an added pressure to the situation. Eventually, they decided what they decided, which was to shut down the global private equity group of Merrill Lynch. There were 7 offices. We were only 70 people. It was quite small, but we touched a lot of money, and it was proprietary money from Merrill Lynch. And so they decided that, the balance sheet right now couldn't handle those investments. And so in my case, they offered me a job with Bank of America in New York. And the other option was severance pay. It was kind of, the package that I would get for them making me redundant. Oddly enough, I just talked about the uncertainty and how difficult it was to manage. I decided to take the money and not the job, which I guess would have been the more secure option. But at the time, like I said, and this, of course, I was already in, my late 20s, almost 30s. By this point, I knew the importance of mental health, of balance, of, of really getting that together. There were some other things going on in my life that just kind of happened at the same time that were very, very difficult. And so I knew that I needed a break. I knew that I needed to take some time off. And luckily, I had that money that I was getting for my severance. And I knew that, I could always, I had my degrees and I could always, look for a new job. And so, yeah, I decided to take some time off, to get myself back together, to make sure that I was doing what I wanted to do. As you can imagine, at that point, there was a lot of wear down, and I just, I was going through a bit of a reshift in terms of making sure that, I was really doing what I wanted to do.
So there's a few points there. The first one being, you're now starting to understand that your personal balance, and that might be different from person to person. But at this point in your life, you've been through multiple educational experiences and multiple job experiences to where that balance has become more clear. On top of that, you've been put in many situations where you've been faced with unexpected things, and you're beginning to learn how to cope with that a little bit. Something my dad always tells me is each week you should plan for 3 unexpected things to happen. So when they do happen, you've planned for them. What became your approach at this point to planning for the unexpected? Because I feel like you're hit with it more than the common person.
Yeah. Like I said, it's at this point is where I'm starting to realize that fighting, going against the flow, so swimming upstream like a salmon is extremely exhausting, right? So by this point, I'm starting to realize that I need to kind of take a step back, look at what the options are, and really, like I said, just kind of let life take care of itself. It's, it goes back to the 3 weeks becoming 3 years in France. It goes back to when I decided to leave France. It goes back to a lot of these decisions that just kind of, like I said, and I try to be careful about this, because when I say, let life take its course, or, if you believe in God has a bigger plan, or energy, or karma, or whatever, it doesn't mean that you just sit there and wait, right? It means that you do everything that you can, everything in your power, for whatever outcome you think you want, right? And then when things are out of your power, you need to kind of let go, right? So at this point, I'm realizing that sitting there and stressing about it, I know it's inevitable, but it wasn't going to change anything. And so that, what I could do is find better times or better things to spend my time on than just worrying, right? So it's hard. I think it's life for everyone. It's, we kind of plan things, and some go our way, some don't. But I think we waste a lot of energy trying to force things to go our way, right? And at this point, for me, I had already, looking back, realized that sometimes things happen in my life and I didn't know why at the time, but when I looked back, I understood. So I started having a little bit more of a relaxed attitude towards saying, all right, maybe I don't know why this is happening, but this needs to happen. It feels right. It might not make a lot of sense, but it feels right. And I started kind of balancing my mind and my gut when it came to making decisions.
So at this point, you were at a spot where, as you said, you needed kind of a reshift or a reset. You needed change in some sort of context. And that came in the form of a move to China. So not only did you immerse yourself in a new country's culture and day-to-day routines, but you also decided to study Mandarin at the Beijing Language and Culture University. While this is fascinating and definitely a change, it initially came as a surprise to me to learn that you did this. It seemed very spontaneous at this point in your life, but nevertheless ended up being fundamental to the positions you took after. What made you choose this as your change? And what was the decision to now take up Mandarin?
Sure. Again, life. But yeah, so basically what happened is I found myself in a situation where I had some money, right, from the severance pay. I had been desperately looking for a job, but the market was flooded with investment bankers, with private equity, venture capitalists, traders, etc., right? Because Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, and whatever spillover was from that had let go of everyone. And so it was very hard as a newly graduated or a year into graduating from business school to compete with people that had 5-10 years of experience that were willing to take entry positions, right? Because the market was flooded. And so, if you're a hiring manager and you say, okay, going back to what we said, right? When you hire someone, you have to train them. Of course, after graduate school, the learning curve is less, but you still have to learn about the company, about the job, about procedures, and so, when they say, well, I can hire someone with 5 years of experience, it was an easy choice for them, right? And when you add to that, going back to, and I think that's something that maybe Americans and Europeans, well, maybe Europeans a little bit more if they study in the US, don't have the sensitivity to, is this whole visa situation, right? Because even if I was at par with someone, they would have to sponsor me and maybe not the other person. And that for them, even though it's paperwork, a lot of the companies would rather not go through it, right? And so I would get to final rounds and they'd be like, but sponsoring, and so it was very frustrating. And so I decided to, and again, having a little bit of hindsight at this point in terms of what had happened in the past, I decided, like I said, I had done everything I could. I had sent probably hundreds of resumes and done a lot of interviews, and not only in Brazil, but everywhere. And there wasn't much more I could do. And so I decided to travel, which was, my passion. And I know it's a passion for everyone. Everyone says they love to travel, but I've moved to countries where I moved permanently, China being one of them, without even having set a foot there, right? I'd never been to China. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Basically what happened is a little bit like France. I decided to just travel around the world for a little bit while things calmed down. And again, luckily I had that money, but if not, I was willing to work as a waiter or work in, whatever, delivering food, and just kind of take some time off until the markets cooled off. And, because of my experience in Wharton, so going into Wharton, the reason I did the Portuguese program is because I thought to myself, well, you know what, I could probably be a VP for the Americas, right? I could handle all of Latin America. I just need to learn Portuguese and learn about the Brazilian market, because it's not the same as the Spanish-speaking market, right? Brazil is a giant and it's a continental country. And so while I was at Wharton, having all these classmates that were doing the same program, but with Japanese and Russian and Chinese, and I realized that, hey, you know what? Maybe I could be more than that. Maybe I could be an emerging markets guy, right? Because now I know Spanish-speaking Latin America, I know Brazil, and then I thought, all right, well, there's no emerging markets conversation without China, right? And so I decided to start, mind you, I still hadn't decided to stay there, but I decided to start my travel there through a friend, a Lauder friend that was there. And sitting down one day and having beers, he said to me, oh, you and this Israeli guy is very like abrasive and like direct, and and he said, you with your languages and your cultures, blah blah. He's like, I bet you'll never learn Chinese, right? And so it was one of those like hold my beer kind of moments, right? Yeah. And so I was like, oh really? Yeah, it was. Listen, it was a bit of a whim, right? But at the same time, when I looked at the other options, which was continuing to bang my head against the wall because I couldn't find a job and doing the same thing over and over again, I said, well, you know what, like that could be a really good differentiating factor, and why not, right? And so, yeah, I decided to, instead of spend my time doing what I had been doing, and I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere or nothing was going to change, right? I could still apply for jobs from China, but I might as well learn Chinese, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of a, let's make a lemonade situation. And yeah, there was a bit of a, like I said, oh yeah, hold my beer sort of thing. And then I ended up staying in Beijing for 2 years and going to school 5 days a week. I think it was like 5 hours a day plus homework. And, it was, yeah, learning how to read, write, speak. Yeah.
It seems like you had somewhat of an internal competition factor throughout your career and always wanting to challenge yourself to an extent. In your undergraduate, you said you had a teacher tell you, hey, you can get into these Masters of Finance programs, that'll get you in a good school. And you took that as, why would I sell myself short? And it seemed like the same situation when you want to learn Mandarin. Why sell yourself short? And I think that's an important point to make, especially to young students and young professionals. At this point in your career, you've already have accomplished so much, and you're still looking for those avenues to push yourself into travel, into new ventures. So after your time learning Mandarin, you found that avenue. And soon after, you took a position as a P associate director for Sino Latin Capital, overseeing a client base that spanned both China and Latin America, just as you discussed. How did your time in Beijing help you at the professional level? And did you see this as a turning point in your career towards a more macro global scale?
Sure. Yeah, 100%. So basically what happened is a friend called me and said, "Are you done with your midlife crisis? Come back to the Western world." China was incredibly interesting, but it also very difficult.
Yeah.
It was things have changed, but still, it wasn't bad, but it was just very different, right? It's me, someone that felt I knew about cultures and how to adapt, and it's interesting because I had all the, I guess, theoretical tools, right? If anybody's interested in this, there's an author called Hofstede, and he writes about the dimensions of culture. And I think that it needs to be updated, but it was fascinating, right? It talks about everything from personal space to polychronic and monochronic cultures, right? So if you speak to people too close, they feel uncomfortable and they'll back away, right? If you speak to people too far away, they'll move forward. But the personal space tends to be culture dictated, right? There's a thing, for example, I know when I learned about this, there's a thing called the thumb rule for Americans, that the comfortable space between Americans to talk is the distance of your arm to put your thumb in their ear, right? And so when I learned this, I was walking around campus just putting my ear in, and all my Americans, and it was true, right? If you get too close, Asians like more distance. Latinos and Arabs tend to be more, or Middle Easterns tend to be more comfortable closer together, right? And the Asian distance applies only to different cultures. They're very close to each other when it's the same, right? So there's a lot of tools that I had, but it's very different again to read them than to put them to use. But of course they were helpful, right? And so
Yeah.
this allowed me to learn and not only about the language, but about the Chinese mentality, the way of structuring thoughts, the way of reaching conclusions, right? It's very different from ours. And so this was when I started seeing how all the different parts of the random decisions I had made started falling into place, right? Because all of a sudden, then I was back in New York, working for private equity, looking into investments in Latin America, a lot of them into Brazil, but it was a Chinese fund based in Shanghai, right?
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, some of these decisions that I had made to move here or do that or started kind of falling into place. It was great, right? It put me in a very unique position to serve that function instead of having to have more than one person or someone that knew about one market but maybe not the other one or hadn't lived in both and worked in both markets. So it definitely, yeah, it was a switch in the sense of starting to realize that these decisions, hey, you know what, they add value, and
Mhm.
if it's something that I want to do in my free time, then maybe I should look into it and look at how I can turn this into something that makes me a more differentiated professional, right? Very unique in terms of my skill set.
Going back to the fact that over the course of your career, you try to find the balance between brain and gut and which one to follow. It seems like when push came to shove, you followed your gut in many of these situations. But at the end of the day, you ended up where you wanted to be. While the journey might have been different than you expected, the outcome aligned rightly with your values and where you wanted to be in life because your gut aligns with those values. So I think that's not only very important for anyone to find their true passion and to find where they're going to be happy in life, but also genuinely for your career about how you ended up where you are. So on top of just investing in China, you actually spent several years positioned in Shanghai, firstly as head of PE and M&A for emerging strategy, and secondly as head of financial service for YCP Solidence. Was there a learning curve for working inside of China rather than solely investing from the exterior? And how did your previous time within the country prepare you for that leap?
Sure. But before I answer that one, let me go back to the comment you made. And to be clear, this gut versus mind, yeah, it started being gut, but this is later on, right? So at this point, I'm in my 30s.
Yeah.
In my 20s, it was all mind, right? It was all like what made sense, what was the most logical. A lot of it had to do with pressures, right? External pressures or perceptions or my peers or, and the reason I was able to kind of start doing more gut is because, I started seeing a pattern, and the fact, a pattern in the sense that, it ended up being something valuable. So the sense of kind of having that balance wasn't there at first. Yeah, it's something that kind of developed. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. And the reason it aligned with my values is because a lot of the time your gut tells you, your gut is kind of aligned with your personal values, right? So if there are things that don't feel right, and you can rationalize them in your head, but they don't feel right, that's probably your values talking to you. Or the other way around, right? Something that maybe your head is like, how are you going to move to China, dude? Like everyone is looking for a job. What are you doing? But my gut was like, you know what, this feels right. And waking up every day and being miserable. And so, and there's other examples where I've been in, markets where I've been offered shady deals where I could have made a lot of money, but it didn't feel right? And I could rationalize in my head, yeah, we'll do this, we'll never get caught. And actually here it's legal, so it's not even illegal. But my gut said, no, don't do it, right? So I think that listening to your gut is related to your values, right? A lot of the times with your head, you try to rationalize everything, and your gut is the one that kind of says, hold on a second, or yes, this feels right. Don't ignore it, even if you can't make sense of it. So I think that's important, right? That came later in life. It wasn't something that I had. I wish I could have had that earlier. I wish I would have known that, right? But the truth is at the time it wasn't. So going back to your question, yeah, listen, in China at that time had been, so up until that point, when I lived in Beijing, it was to study. And I did do a little bit of helping people source stuff from China, but it was studying. And so this time around, it was working, and it was different. I was in Shanghai, which is very different from Beijing. I've always said Beijing is like DC and Shanghai is like New York, right? So one is the capital, and you have people from NGOs and think tanks and the World Bank and the IMF and embassies. And, there's a lot of it's a different kind of crowd. Shanghai is money, fast pace, commerce, so there's a good parallel there. So Shanghai was different, right? It was, in this case, it was a lot more about business. It was work. And the reason I decided to go into consulting was that I realized I didn't know the market well enough to try to invest, to go into it as an investor. And a great way to learn about a market is through consulting, because you work with different industries in different parts of projects. You're exposed to maybe supply chain or, governance, or you're exposed to electronics industry or whatever, right? So you get a lot of kind of different feels in relatively short-term projects about different things. So I knew that was going to be a good way to kind of learn about the market. And that's what drove me to kind of sidestep a little bit, still within financial services, but not necessarily as directly involved as an investor.
And on top of investing in China, you actually were in charge of both Asian markets and the Middle East. So how did these two differ? How did you kind of take a hold of both simultaneously? And as you said, the first time in China was educational, and the second time was work related. So now you're faced with learning curves on two ends. And so I'm guessing this was a big growing moment for you. Can you talk a
100%.
little bit about your experience in the Middle East and how these two molded together?
Sure. So again, opportunity presented itself and I raised my hand. It was, I was working China, and like I said, at this point I had realized, you know what, I would love to do emerging markets. So now I had the Americas, now I had Asia, and while working in China, I traveled a lot to Southeast Asia. So I worked a lot in Thailand, Indonesia, Cambodia, you name it, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong. I was spending a lot of time going to those places because they do a lot of business with China, right? And a lot of the times the headquarters for Asia is based in China, but they manage those markets. And so the opportunity came up for the Middle East. In fact, I think it was like 5 or 6 days into my new job with YCP Solidians, and we landed a contract in Iran, in Tehran, right?
Wow.
And so we had a small office in Dubai, but it was a really big contract. And this is around the time that Hillary and Donald Trump were in the election, and everybody was expecting Hillary to win. So everybody was expecting the sanctions in Iran to be lifted. It is the largest market in the Middle East by far. It is a market that consumes a lot, and so car makers, fast-moving consumer goods, construction companies and material, you name it, they were all salivating to get back into that market, right? And so at the time when the call came in, it was companies saying, hey, we need your help with a strategy for Iran. Well, it turns out that a lot of my colleagues were from countries that they couldn't go to Iran. And so, my boss called me or left me a message on WhatsApp and said, hey, we have this project in Iran. I was just wondering if, you'd be open to it. And then she left me another one saying, hey, I'm so sorry I asked you this. How inappropriate. This is your first week. And, and I just thought about it. And I was like, all right, well, I guess if they send me there, and mind you, later I discovered something completely different from what I thought it would be, but I thought it would be dangerous, right? I thought it would be, and I was like, maybe they'll give me some sort of security or, but I immediately messaged her back and said, hey, I'll do it 100%, count me in, and they're like, really, you don't mind? I was like, no, let's do this, right? And luckily I have a look that can pass as, Latino, Arab, I can be from anywhere. I did have to grow the beard. I didn't have a beard at the time. My boss asked me to grow it. But so, that took me there. And from there, I started doing, I started obviously working with the office in Dubai. And by being there, I started getting deals in Lebanon. So we opened an office there that I was running. I was building the office in Iran. I was very much involved with building the team in Dubai, right? So by kind of raising the hand to that one opportunity, it led to other ones. I found the Middle East to be fascinating. It's a very, very interesting region with very unique problems, but very different from what we know, right? And that's one of the things that I learned early on is that, we're very biased by what we hear on the media, right? And at the time, mind you, social media wasn't maybe as non-existent, I think, as it is when I was in college. But, I realized that Iran was nothing like what the US media at least showed, right? It was, people were welcoming. I felt safe. There's areas of it that you think you're in Paris, right? Like smart, hardworking, like not at all, never did I feel unsafe, right? So it's a lot of kind of questioning these perceptions that we have of things that we don't even know. So venturing a little bit, the curiosity that we're talking about. But again, it was raising my hand. And so, yeah, it was fascinating. It aligned with my emerging markets specialty. It allowed me to grow my network and put these cultural tools to use, right? I can't stress enough how important it is, right? I saw deals fall flat. And a lot of the cultural values you'll see in expressions. And that's why I like learning languages, because I like to speak to people with their kind of nothing being lost in translation. And a common expression in the US is time is money, right? Which means point A to point B, straight line. If you go do business in Latin America, chances are they'll be like, oh, is this your first time in Costa Rica? We have to take you to this restaurant, right? And that could be frustrating from someone that just landed to sign a contract and wants to leave. In the Middle East, you have to build trust before you talk about business, right? So there's certain topics that you talk about, like you ask about the kids. There's certain topics that you avoid, like wives, because maybe it's different. They might feel judged, right? So you get offered usually 3 cups of tea. You say yes. You don't ask for a 4th one. You don't say no after the 2nd one. You don't point the soles of your shoes at anyone, right? And so stuff like this made them feel very comfortable with me. I would sit there, observe, and that I can't speak enough of how important that is, because at the end of the day, business is business. Of course, they're going to go with something that makes sense, but people want to work with people that they want to work with. And if you make them feel comfortable, and if you understand things beyond the business talk, if you create an environment, like we were saying earlier, where they don't feel stupid asking questions, where they feel comfortable asking questions that they wouldn't ask, right? Where they're professional, what I call professional ego kind of is allowed to, and they appreciate these things. You know, I've had clients where, you know, the French are notoriously bad at English, where the client is French, and I can deliver the presentation, the slides in French for them and in English for the rest. And that to them is a huge relief, right? Because then they can ask me questions in French and not have to worry about. So all those tools of culture and languages were starting to come together, right? A lot of Middle Eastern countries speak French, like Lebanon and Algeria and Morocco, right? So North Africa, those. But yeah, so yeah, definitely eye-opening. It was fascinating. It allowed me to firsthand get my impressions rather than get them from, you know, news media or stuff like that, and to grow my network, which is always a big one.
Yeah, I think the ability to challenge your not only own perceptions, but common perceptions has been important for you. And you said you raise your hand to put yourself in certain situations. And by doing that, you have learned more about the people around you, commonalities between different cultures, as well as the differences. I personally, I worked in Australia this past summer, where you currently are. And that was a learning curve for me, because even though it's an English speaking nation, that kind of acted as a barrier within itself, because I believed I was being clear on certain topics, or I thought I understood certain things my boss was saying, when in reality, there was a mismatch. And if I said something, it seemed like he really appreciated something or didn't appreciate something, when in reality, it's just wording or how someone expresses themselves based on the culture, where you might not understand it correctly. And
I mean, I can tell you, for example, here I've had to change the tone of my emails to be a lot less. They felt they were very aggressive, right? I'm used to kind of US investment banking language of like, all right, let's get this done.
I noticed that as well. Yeah.
And yeah, some of the feedback that I got was that, you know, hey, like, be a little bit nice. And I was like, but I mean, first of all, I'm not being mean. But second, like, I mean, we're here to do something. We're talking. But yeah, I mean, for them, you know, they're very non-confrontational Australians, and so things have to be managed in a very different way, you know. And yeah, absolutely, there is a culture shock, even if it's the same language.
And I think the fact that you've done that so much throughout your career allowed you to become a better communicator. And that's actually statistically the most hireable trait. While you can have all the technical skills required, being able to rise in the ranks of a company or set yourself up for your future endeavors, you need to be able to communicate properly. And to be able to do that throughout multiple cultures throughout the planet is a very special thing. So transitioning to somewhat of a different topic. After 20 successful years in traditional finance, much of which we've already gone through, you more recently have taken part in growth stage ventures in the DeFi space. For those who don't know, I mean decentralized finance, things in the blockchain and crypto sphere. What initially interested you in blockchain and eventually allowed you to make the professional transition?
Sure. So I'm sure you see the theme here by now, right? So it was by chance. a friend of mine called me and said, should I invest in Bitcoin? And this is in 2000 and it must have been around 2006 or so. And said, should I invest in Bitcoin? Oh, sorry, not 2000. What am I saying? 2000, and I graduated 2002. So around 2016. Sorry, not six. And said, should I invest in Bitcoin? You are, the finance guy that I know, and blah blah blah, and your career and your degrees, and I realized I didn't know anything about it, right? And so I said to myself, crap, this is relevant to my industry, right? So I started reading about it and learning about it. I found it fascinating. It was very interesting. And that's how I got into, more than Bitcoin, I would say blockchain. And so, again, it just kind of piqued my curiosity. And I started spending a lot of my time learning about the technology itself and kind of its potential and what I thought it could do. And that kind of made that transition, right? As I started learning more and more and the technology started evolving, I kind of stayed on top of it. And next thing I knew, I knew a lot more than, a lot of people, because I've spent hundreds of hours reading white papers and, presentations and stuff like that, at the time, the educational component of blockchain wasn't really out there. So, I did it on my own and yeah, I found it fascinating, which is why I did it.
So moving into when you kind of developed the technical side of things, I saw you acted as COO for ZK2, one of your portfolio companies, where you advise on everything from layer 2 platform launch to tokenomics and even token design. So these are largely things that, as you said, you had no knowledge of prior. And you're just starting to learn all of this that you needed. So you're kind of thrown directly into it. You also participated in the fundraising of a $15 million Series A, and it seemed like your business development skills from your consultancy work began to mesh very well with your novel knowledge of blockchain. I've highlighted some of the things you accomplished on the macro scale as EK2, but can you explain what this role entailed on the day-to-day basis?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's a great question. It's one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that a job is a job, right? And there are days where you're going to love it, and there are days where you're going to hate it. And I think in this case, it was fascinating. But what I'm trying to say is that it sounds really sexy when you say, oh, COO and $15 million raised. And but the truth is, what's important is the work. That's one thing that I definitely want to stress, is that when you have projects like these, a lot of people want to be involved. A lot of people want to, they hear what you're doing, they think it's fascinating. How do I connect you? How do I do this? But not a lot of people want to put their head down and do the work. And that is something that's very, very important, right? In the case of ZK2, they are a zero knowledge layer 2 on Ethereum, and it was a bit technical, but the day-to-day entails a lot of the times just making sure things are getting done and doing stuff yourself, right? So if we're talking about raising funds, what do we need to have? Well, luckily, my experience as a venture capitalist, it allows me to know what, I've been on the other side of the table, right? So I know what the investors are looking for. And that means making sure that, you have a deck that's on point, that is clear, that you have financials that make sense, that you have a message that you can articulate, that you have, all of whatever marketing contingent you need at the time, that your numbers are solid in terms of, your projections. And so when you're raising money, a lot of it goes into that, right? So a lot of time is spent building presentations. It's a lot of time spending building models. And throughout the process, I think it's very valuable, because if there are holes in your business strategy, you'll find them, right? So for example, if you're not very clear on what your product offering is, once you start building a financial model and you get to the revenue part, you're going to have a hard time, right? So it forces you to kind of sit down and say, okay, what are our specifics in terms of products or services? What do we charge for each one of them? Who is the target audience for this? How are we going to reach them? How much is that going to cost, right? So when you're creating these documents, you end up creating, if you haven't done so already, obviously you start with the business plan, but you end up kind of realizing where the gaps are, where you're not as clear. And so day to day of something like this is a lot of work. It's managing teams and making sure that you delegate the stuff that other people can help with. It's making sure that you pick up the slack if there is any. It's managing a lot of relationships and having a lot of calls. It's also a lot of no's, right? It's a lot of, and I think that's something that you build, and I wish I would have built before, but it's that resiliency of, many times you get a no and you can't let that discourage you, because many businesses are a numbers game, right? If you're doing business development and your conversion rate is 1%, well, that means that you have to do 100 calls to get one deal. And if you have to do 3 deals a month, that means you have to do at least 300 calls a month, right? So it's a matter of just being persistent, doing the work, and being resilient. It's not a everyday a sexy job. It's a lot of work.
And so you spent a lot of time at large organizations, and you began to kind of build a bridge over to this other aspect where now you're doing not only product development, financial development, and the whole business side of things, where before you were investing in companies like this, you're now helping to build one. Do you think this helped build a bridge to where you went next with Mercury Ventures, where you were able to distill your focus down to blockchain startups and businesses?
Yeah, and so actually ZK2 was a portfolio company of Mercury Ventures. So I was already there. Yeah, it's the reason I created and I founded Mercury Ventures was going back to what we had talked about at the beginning, which is creating an environment that is positive, that is, a safe environment to make mistakes, to ask questions, to, kind of have that flat hierarchy in terms of the team. So that was my goal. It was to replicate a little bit what I had found in Bain or Mesoamerica at the beginning, to kind of look for people that I felt had a lot of potential, that had the interest, that really wanted to move forward with that. And so it's different. Absolutely. You have to worry about everything, right? So a lot of the admin details that when you work for a large corporation are done for you, or human resources or stuff like that, right? But definitely having worked a lot with startups in the past was helpful, right? I knew kind of what are the different areas that I needed to hit. I knew which ones I'm strong in, which ones I'm not, and therefore needed help in those. And just kind of taking those steps. I started empathizing a lot with some of the entrepreneurs, because I started realizing, a lot of their growing pains from their side. And this also goes back to a little bit working with when it was when you talked about Phil and Banco and Merrill Lynch, which was a great question. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, there were a lot of parallels, right? Except in the other one, I was on the other side of the equation, and when I was doing the liquidation of Phil and Banco, and yeah, I was very young as my first job, but the people were numbers, right? The number of people that you had to lay off, and the number of, they were just kind of problems that you had to solve. But when you're at the other side of the equation and you're one of those numbers that's being shuffled, and your whole life depends on it, like I said, it gives you definitely a different sensitivity towards those things. And so, I wanted to create in Mercury Ventures a place where not only, the staff that was working with me, but also the startups created a collaborative environment, right? And in finance, ego is a big issue. I've never been a big fan of politics, internal politics. They're inevitable, but the ones that can be avoided, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a place where people could learn, could grow, and could kind of feel comfortable doing so.
That aspect where you want other people to grow along with you, where it's not mutually exclusive or a zero-sum game, seems to be important along your pathway. And since May, you have been working with Token Tactics as managing partner, your third company since being present in now Australia, another country. I thought this was super interesting because part of your role actually entails educating executives on what blockchain technology has to offer. So it goes back to that inclusive nature in wanting others to be knowledgeable about these topics. I think this is important, not only for your career, but that this education can cinch the gap between those who understand the math and technology behind these assets and those who invest purely out of emotion to more of a common ground where there's less volatility. Is this one of your goals? And do you see the work you're currently doing as an accelerator towards a more blockchain heavy world in the future?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I mean, as you know, Mercury Ventures went on, and it actually evolved to Token Tactics. So you know, they're directly related. One of the things that became very obvious, and this from the beginning with blockchain, was that if people don't understand something, they'll say no to it, right? That is a known fact, and particularly people that are making decisions related to businesses and money and, you know, have pressures, right? And so a couple of times when I was in Solidians, in YCP Solidians, we had proposed certain blockchain products to large corporations. One of them flat out said no, the board said no, and I knew it was because they just didn't understand it and they didn't want to ask, right? We go back to that professional ego of they didn't want to seem less senior than they are by saying I don't understand this, or you know, come across as maybe a little bit obsolete if they say, oh, I don't get this technology stuff, right? So it's a no. And so one of the things I realized while working with Mercury Ventures when I was raising funds was that a lot of people just didn't get it. And part of my training for new staff was a little bit of getting them up to speed. And so I started developing this content that, you know, ended up becoming a company in itself, but it was content for non-technical people to understand blockchain, right? So the way I've put it is that, you know, you kind of have two camps. One is the older guys that don't get it, don't really want to learn because, you know, they're on their way out. And these are kind of the decision makers in very large corporations. And then you have a younger generation that gets blockchain, that understands DeFi and crypto, but they don't have the business experience, right? They haven't been out in the market. And like I said earlier, it's one thing to kind of learn about things, another thing to be out there in the real world. And so I kind of realized there was this gap. And so I positioned myself a little bit in the middle, right? And being this bridge of, you know, helping younger kids understand how the real world works, in terms of a business plan being implemented and growth, you know, and being realistic about things like that. And then helping, you know, kind of an older generation or a non-technical generation understand the power of blockchain. And so education is key. I'd like to say that initially my mission was, you know, as nice as you're putting it, to kind of level things out, but it was also business related, right? If I wanted people to hire my services or give me money for my funds to invest or understand why I was doing things, I needed them to be on board. And in order to be on board, they had to understand. So that's where that came about. It's I think very useful and you know, like I say to a lot of people that I've helped understand, it's a responsibility, particularly if you're in a board, right? It's your responsibility to your shareholders, to your stakeholders, to understand what's out there. That doesn't mean that you have to necessarily implement it, but you need to know what exists. And you need to know if your competition is using it. And you need to know how it's going to change your market, right? It's revolutionized a lot of markets. And so it doesn't mean that you have to learn about the technology. And that's why I call it for like non-technical people, right? We all use our email. Doesn't mean that we all know about DNS servers and proxy servers and ports and stuff like that, right? We don't, but we know how our email works. And so it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of, let me tell you how this works, what its potential is, how it could affect your market, you know, or anything around that. And as much as you need to know about the technical stuff, but none of the stuff you don't need to know, right? So that's what kind of started it, and that's kind of how it came about.
So helping people understand these concepts in the business world, as well as just as a general populace, was part of a business strategy for you. As I did phrase it nicely, you have to make the distinction as well that this is important for your business to thrive. For this to continue to be a trend moving forward, and for there to be greater adoption of cryptocurrencies and blockchain usage, this understanding needs to be more widespread. Given current events, true crypto enthusiasts argue that the FTX crash is not representative of the crypto ecosystem, as FTX and other centralized exchanges are not the true purpose of these technologies. They're not truly decentralized. Given such, how do you expect the average consumer to familiarize themselves with true economic decentralization? And is it realistic for the learning curve to be mitigated enough, as you said, for widespread adoption of decentralized economy?
All right, yeah, good question. So I do agree. I do think that FTX is not representative, and I'll tell you why. It falls in that camp that I spoke about, young professionals that understood the technology but don't understand business, right? I read the report of the liquidator, at least the initial one, and he was the liquidator for Enron, and he said this is worse than Enron, right? He's been in the industry for 40 years, and he said this is the worst that he's seen. And when you look at their structure, and when you look at, the lack of compliance and, a lot of mechanisms that are necessary for this sort of operation, a part of me thinks that there's a lot of ignorance, right? They just didn't know, and the business grew, and they started doing stuff, and there was a lot of and because regulation is lacking and it's not very clear. This is an example of that. It's people that understand technology, put something out there that starts growing, but they don't have any business experience, and so they don't know how to grow in an organized way, in a responsible way, how to put in, like I said, compliance, anything that has to do with conflict resolution is very important in finance, right? There's a lot of things that needed to be in place. So yeah, I don't think it's representative. And I think what's going on in the industry as a whole, of course, it's very painful, but it's a necessary adjustment. There was a lot of investment that was speculative, a lot of investments by people that didn't know what they were investing in, right? And we've seen all the rug pulls in NFTs and in different, yes, there are malicious players out there that are taking advantage of the system, for sure. There will always be, right? We see that in traditional finance as well. Yes, there are operations that are a mess, and in some cases, maybe by ignorance, in some cases, fraudulent operations. But we also see that in traditional finance, right? We see that in companies that get shut down all the time. I mean, we just talked about companies like Merrill Lynch and Lehman Brothers going under, right? So the reason it gets a lot of attention is because it's a lot sexier to report something about crypto or blockchain, or it attracts a lot more eyeballs than something in traditional finance, right? That's not that sexy anymore. So I would say that the market gets a little bit of a bad rep. That said, I think it's a good thing because it scares people away. And so you shouldn't invest in anything you don't understand. It's as simple as that. It's, if you want to invest in something and you don't understand it, you have two choices. One, you learn about it, or two, you pay someone that does understand it to do it for you, right? So what happened was a lot of people just thought this was an endless kind of gold mine and started pumping money in there. And then eventually the system, for whatever reasons, justified or not, has had its crashes. But I think it's important, it's obviously horrible for people to lose their money, but I think it's important to kind of create that, I won't say fear, but a little bit of intimidation, because that's what financial products should create, right? Not only digital ones, but also when we're talking about traditional finance, is you're not going to go and throw your money into something that a guy in a bank tells you to or at least you shouldn't. And if they tell you, maybe you do it because you assume they know what they're talking about. But so the number one thing I believe is education, right? The number one thing is, or understanding. Take the time to read what you're going to invest in. If you don't understand it, then don't invest in it. I think that is very, very important when it comes to crypto. I think that a lot of the people that lost money was because they just didn't do their due diligence. Not all, of course, but yeah, it's very important. It's not there. And so I think that, and also the other thing is, there's no recourse, right? At this point, it's there because it's decentralized. There is, in theory, no regulator, and there is no 1-800 number to call if you did something wrong, right? I've lost a lot of money through trial and error. At the beginning, when I didn't know that a USDC from Solana and a USDC from Ethereum were on different blockchains, and therefore you couldn't send one to the other. In my head, I'm thinking, well, it's just like a bank account from one bank, the same currency. Well, no, it turns out that I sent it to space, right? So anyways, there's a lot of things that are important in Web3, particularly in DeFi and crypto, right? Because blockchain is a lot more than just that.
Yeah.
And that requires a minimum of education. So like any, not different from any other financial product, is do your own research, make sure you understand, don't get wowed by huge returns. And, doesn't mean that opportunities are not out there. It just means that the only way to mitigate your risk and to manage it is by understanding it.
And I think pushing it into that long-term view shows that this is not representative of the future of cryptocurrency as a whole. As we saw with the 2008 financial crisis, which you well know, as we talked about, a lot of it was built upon speculation that pushed a bubble, especially with some of these assets that most people didn't understand, with CDOs and with these mortgage bonds that were largely pushed on people that didn't understand them. And so it pushed prices up on things that wasn't based on intrinsic value, but rather on speculation. I remember personally, throughout the whole buzz of cryptocurrency, of which I currently don't invest in fully because I don't know enough about it yet, a lot of my friends and people around me were telling me, hey, get in this, get in this, get in this, get in this. And this was early on in college, where I questioned whether they really knew what they were getting into. And they didn't. They said, I don't know what it is, but it's going up. And that's largely caused what we see now, where it's getting rid of kind of the secondary players in a sort, and really limiting it down to those who truly are knowledgeable on the concept. And we can expand that pie by creating those educational opportunities, as you said.
Well, it's also, I think, important to keep in mind that this is happening. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's happening in a larger macroeconomic context. And so when you have, the levels of inflation that you have and interest rates rising, trying to keep it under control, when you have, a lot of the, tensions in the world that are happening, obviously this influences that, right? Because
yeah, definitely,
as the government starts to contract the supply of money, a lot of people start having a harder time, and therefore a lot of the investments that were in crypto were taken out, unfortunately at a loss, because most of the markets crashed because of FTX and Luna and the scandals that we've had in the past. So I agree. It's important to be educated. It's important to understand, but it's also important to not make that big. Like, it's just like I said. It's just like, we saw the Ponzi scheme with Madoff, right? And that was traditional finance. And so again, it's a matter of understanding things. It's a matter of, but also it's a matter of, just like you would do with any other investment, if you're looking at stocks right now, is understanding how a larger context, a macroeconomic context, affects things, right? Because times are expected to get tough. Therefore, people are expected to invest less in speculative investments. Crypto, DeFi is very much in that category, still of high risk. So that makes a difference. On the other hand, you can also create DeFi products that are tailored towards recessions, right? So one of the work fronts that I have right now is looking at, in previous recessions, what has been the effect on different types of investment vehicles, and how can we create actually a vehicle that is positive for those sort of scenarios, right? And in this case, we're not talking so much about the returns, we're talking more about maintaining value, right? So just not losing, right? So we need to create products that speak to that reality. It would be completely, not listening to the room if all of a sudden we're putting high risk, high yield products out there when the when the sentiment right now is, it's time to just kind of sit back, be safe, and wait, right? So taking, like you would do with any other financial investment, the macroeconomic side of things into account, is very important.
And your time in traditional finance, I think, made you primed well for this current situation where you're experiencing a crypto winter, and it is tougher times in an industry where all those other contexts play a hand into it in traditional finance, and with raised interest rates by the Fed and the fact that, okay, now I'd rather put my money in the bank than say into these assets. So just to zoom out a little bit, you talked about the fact that, or you referenced the fact that there's different applications for blockchain. I read an article of yours which described cryptocurrency as the most well-known application of blockchain, but arguably the least useful for business. Can you expand on this topic a little bit and explain some of the other applications of blockchain?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I stand by that one. For traditional businesses, the application of DeFi is limited a lot of the times to cash management, right? So it could be treasury, or it could be on the side of investments that you may have you hold on your balance sheet and stuff like that. But past that, yeah, the exchange of value is important, but blockchain is very powerful for other functions in the sense of traceability, transparency, looking at the speed of the exchange of information. So, for example, we can look at Renault, the French car maker. They have put all of their assembly and production line in a blockchain. And what that means is that every single piece of a car that goes into assembling that car is registered and put into the blockchain, which at the end of the day is a database, right? The difference with traditional database is how the information is stored. But so all the information of a car is there. So what happens is, if, let's say 5 years from now, they realize that a batch of their rear suspension production had faulty materials, rather than having to recall all of the cars, they know exactly to which cars those faulty parts were put into, right? So they can immediately target and get to the people that have those cars, right? So it saves obviously a lot of money in terms of understanding that. But not only that, you can take the application even further. So let's say, for example, you use batteries, right? You do something electric. We know that a lot of the products that are being used to create these batteries are being mined in mines where there's child labor, and there's a lot of kind of questionable practices. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is about 40% of the mining in, I want to say Congo. Don't quote me on that one, but I think 40% of the raw material that comes from Congo that is necessary to build the batteries that we use in all of our electric vehicles and all that stuff. So it's 40% of the raw material, right? So blockchain allows you also to have proof of origin, because what happens if you say, well, I want to make sure I'm not sourcing from these mines, but you get the part already made, you don't know where the raw material came from. But if this raw material, which is actually being done in mining, by the way, from the get-go is being kind of put into the blockchain, and you can follow its whole journey. It's endless, right? Imagine that you got a house, and your house has all these different building materials, and all of a sudden they say, it turns out that the pipes that we were putting out in 2022 they're poisonous, right? They have something. And so you don't know if your house was built with those pipes. It was built that year. Are you going to risk it? But if when you get your house, you get a digital footprint of your house, you know exactly what materials went in there, who bought them, how much they paid for them, where they came from, right? So you can check not only that, but maybe if you break a tile, you know what type of tile it is and where it was bought, right? So it has a digital record. When you sell that house, the new owner can see all of the changes that you've made and all of that, right? So all of a sudden, let's say the walkthrough of inspecting a house is different. And this applies to many, many things, right? The transparency of donations for NGOs so that you can see where your money went, exactly how it was spent. We're seeing a lot of it for luxury goods, right? To make sure that they are not fake. And I mean, I think the most famous example is Walmart with the mangoes, where, they had a batch of mangoes that had some sort of disease in a store. They needed to find where they came from, and they kind of did this in parallel. It took, I think, the people at, I think it's Walmart, yeah, about 10 days to figure out where it came from. And arguably, the biggest experts in fast-moving consumer goods, it took the blockchain like 2 seconds, right? It told you exactly which farm the mango came from, and which box, like which other mangoes were in that box, and what container were they in, and right. So this traceability gives you not only more control, it gives you visibility down your value chain, up your value chain, right? If you're, again, a car maker, once you sell it to the car agency, you lose visibility. Well, what if you could see who's buying those cars and which ones are selling more, and you can go directly into your client. So again, it's about connecting people and eliminating third parties, but it's also about increasing the efficiency, the transparency, and we have companies like Home Depot that have blockchain now in place. We have companies that are doing shipping and logistics. We have companies in healthcare. It's a big one, right? For pharmaceutical, in terms of drug trials, huge. In terms of gathering information, making sense of it. And then when you combine blockchain with artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, and it becomes very, very powerful. So yeah, money is one thing, but there's also something to be said for integrating value chains, for having complete transparency of a product, for having the ability to trace not only back but also forward in the value chain what happens. And so all of this is extremely valuable for business. I mean, it's hard to come up with an industry that wouldn't benefit from implementing some of the solutions.
It's not only valuable for business, but also for consumers. And I like they used examples that truly resonate with people. Not only does it save money for businesses and there's less scrap, but at the same time, those burdens aren't then transferred onto the consumer in the price. And also with examples such as the fruit from Walmart, being able to effectively and quickly eliminate dangerous or health-ridden products benefits the consumer in a way that extends beyond just financial needs. And the fact that, or sourcing from places where there's child labor, and being able to take that out of those businesses, or be more transparent about what businesses are doing activity there, I think is very important for consumers now more than ever.
Absolutely. And it goes into, again, safety on the road, safety with medication, safety with a lot of things, right? And if you think about, for example, things that get automated, when we talk about auditing, right? Auditing financial statements. Well, if all of your operations are done on a blockchain that we know is immutable, that we know it's transparent, then the auditors can just download that and certify that it's real, right? No longer do you have to go in there and dig into accounts and where's this money, where's that money. All of it is recorded on there. And so, obviously, then it becomes an issue of the control of the information, which is very important. But the use of cryptography makes blockchain pseudo-anonymous. It's not anonymous, but it is pseudo-anonymous. But yeah, absolutely. It's, at the end of the day, is having those benefits that can really help consumers, that can help business, that can make things more efficient, that can connect people directly. It changes things, and I think for the good, for the positive.
Speaking of generating positive outlooks for individuals, as I move into my last few questions, I really want to narrow down into how people can strive to live a life similar to yours, not necessarily in content, but in mindset. You've already accomplished so much in your career and have developed a unique pathway that catered your life to what you sought to become. Many times students in their undergraduate years feel pressured to commit themselves to a certain career trajectory or pathway that might not suit them, but provides a safety net for their future. It may seem to fulfill that shiny object in the room. Were there moments in your life where you fell victim to these pressures, whether they be internal or external, and how did you learn to curb them?
100%. I mean, I think that's, I don't know anyone that hasn't, right? You get bombarded with messages of what success looks like, from TV, from your parents, from your family, from your peers, right? You a lot of the times make decisions based on ego, money, prestige, stuff like that. So pressure is inevitable, I would say. I think you learn this. It's hard to kind of, but what I would say is there is something to be said, like I said before, for following your gut. There is something to be said for pursuing things that you find interesting, even if they don't immediately kind of make sense with, what you're doing professionally. I think that it is okay to not do what people want you to do if it doesn't feel like that's you. A lot of the times at those ages, the pressure comes from the parents. They'll get over it, I mean, and a lot of the time, even if you do go into something that you don't want to and you do it for other people, you'll be miserable, right? And this is supposed to be how you spend your life. And so as hard as it is to kind of go your own way, I think it's important. And that's what makes people unique, right? That's what makes people have a unique skill set. I think that if I would have taken the job with Bank of America when Merrill went down and said, you know what the hell am I talking about going to China? No. I'm going to go back to New York, keep working, do the same thing because that's what I'm supposed to do. My life would, I'm not going to say it would be worse or better, but it would be very different, right? And yeah, I remember when I was making that decision, there were people around me that were saying, what, you're nuts, China, but you've never even been there. Like, what are you doing, But it felt right to me. And so it ended up being one of my differentiating advantages, right? Speaking Mandarin and knowing the Chinese culture and having had experience on the ground. And so I think that sometimes following that traditional path that people tend to kind of push you into will make you almost like a lemming, right? More of the same. And you see a lot of this when you apply to business school. So I interview people and read essays. I'm part of the admissions kind of committee. When you have a lot of, and I don't mean to ruffle any feathers for anyone here, but like, for example, I remember last class I was reading, there were a lot of white male investment bankers, right? And so you could have an 800 GMAT, but you can't fill a class with people with the same profile. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that experience that I described, right? Where a brain surgeon and a Air Force pilot from the Israeli army were sitting next to me, so being unique is good. Having a differentiating factor is good. Having a story to tell makes you interesting. Following that kind of traditional path can actually hurt you sometimes, right? I remember also at the time there were a lot of male engineers from India applying, right? And they were brilliant, but there's only so many you can have in a group that you want to be diverse. And that's kind of what the workforce in certain regards is. If you want to stand out, if you want to be different, if you then embrace those topics that interest you, look into them, put in the time. Languages, of course, I'm a big fan of. It's hard work. I think that a lot of the times when people say to me like, oh, wow, you speak 6 languages, like, how do you do it? Well, I studied like crazy, right? Like, and I didn't give up when I was demotivated. And I also didn't push myself too hard when I wasn't feeling it because I knew I wasn't getting in. But, it's some of these lines that take a second to say, it took years to create in terms of the experience. And so working hard usually is easier when you're doing something that you really enjoy. So yeah, do your job, work hard, do what you're supposed to, but also embrace your uniqueness and embrace things that you are interested in, right? I, for example, one of the companies that we're looking into now, acquiring trains kids to become professional gamers, right? And there are 420 universities in the US that will give you a full ride for college if you are a good like esports athlete, right? So a lot of the times now these parents that were saying, oh my God, my kid games all day and blah, 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 are realizing that that is turning into a lucrative career, right? So yeah, I mean, they stuck with it, right? I know of a guy that just got $1.2 million offered to him in scholarships by multiple universities.
Wow.
And he's just a great gamer, right? Like, and this kid is really interesting. He used to be an athlete. He broke his knee, I believe, his junior year, so he couldn't be a physical athlete anymore. So he started gaming, and that competitive nature and that kind of drive and of an athlete was still there. And yeah, now he's an esports athlete. So it goes to show that sometimes interests that other people might not get, that they might not support, that they might not share, if you enjoy them and if you are good at them, and it doesn't mean go out there and game all day if you're not going to become a professional gamer, right? Like, but it means make sure that you follow that and that you follow through, because it's not always fun. It's not always easy. I remember when I was learning Mandarin, I was just like sitting there thinking like, why did I do this to myself, right? Like, but at the end of the day, it pays off. So it's about that. It's about kind of not realizing that everybody's advice or most people's advice is well-intentioned, but they're not you, and they don't know all of you, and they don't know. And I would also say it's also okay to make mistakes and look back and say, oh, I thought I wanted this, but I don't. Because it happens a lot that I see people that make a decision, then commit to it, and they'd rather be miserable for a while. Eventually it blows up, but be miserable for a while than accept that they made a mistake, right? And that's also not healthy. So it's a balance of the gut. But I guess at your age, what I would say is listen to that gut as well. Your mind is going to tell you a lot of things. I remember while being in business school, kind of getting caught up in a crowd that was rushing back. And I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, applications for investment banking internships are closing today. And then I was rushing back home, sending my applications, right? And my partner at the time said to me, but I thought you didn't want to. You said you would absolutely not go back to investment banking. And I was like, yeah, but they're due today. And, and it's just very easy to get caught up in that. And if it's not you, that's okay. It doesn't mean you don't have to be a financier or a doctor or a lawyer, or like, you could excel at your career, and it doesn't have to be one of those. And there's a lot of prestige, pressure, money, blah, blah. The truth is you won't be probably a good professional, therefore you probably won't make a lot of money, even if you go into these professions, but you hate it.
I think, sorry for my voice going. As I said before, I'm still battling a little bit of a cold, but I really like how you explain the fact that if you do follow those large crowds, there's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but your uniqueness and your ability to really show who you are is diminishing, rather than what people originally thinking, oh, I need to become an investment banker because those are the people that succeed. I need to be like that person. When in reality, if you're being like that person, you're being less like yourself, and there's less of a differentiation. So as you progress in your career, you don't want to become a clone of someone else. You want to really express who you are.
You want to stand out. I mean, going back to what I was saying, for example, in your case, right? You're a white male from the US, you're studying there. Let's say, you want to go to a top business school. Well, it might make you more interesting if you went to Africa and did, odd jobs and learned things, and than if you go to New York and work for JP Morgan through their training program, right? I'm not saying that one is better than the other one. Everything is different for everyone, but it doesn't mean that you are less accomplished than the guy that stayed in New York and is making more money than you. Because at the end of the day, that, it doesn't make a difference in terms not only of your life experience, but also as your profile as a professional. And having these kind of off the beaten path experiences also leads you to opportunities that you wouldn't get if you stayed in the mainstream, right? If I had never gone back to China and then raised my hand to go to Iran, then I would have never, seen the Middle East. And so it's a little bit of that. It's giving yourself also the possibility of exploring things that you're interested in, maybe not everyone else is.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful way to kind of wrap things up at the end. I really encourage people to take your advice into consideration, especially at this pivotal point in our lives. A lot of our audience that I'm targeting is in the undergraduate years of their collegiate time, and those pressures are on full scale. And I know personally I've experienced them, especially throughout my first 2.5 years at college, and know it's not going to be slowing down at all moving forward as everyone starts to search for jobs. So I really do appreciate everything you've given to this podcast.
You're welcome. Yeah, listen, and of course you have my contact information, and I know this has been very long, I'm sorry. But if anybody that's
No, it's great. I really appreciate it.
wants to reach out, have them contact you, and you can put me in, you can put them in touch with me. I think that, yeah, it's about, and I would like to close with this, is that I know it feels like the world, you have the weight of the world on your shoulders right now. I remember feeling that way. I remember how everything felt so important. And it is. I'm not trying to diminish its importance. But what I am trying to say is that you will have the least to lose now than going forward. In other words, now you have the least amount of responsibilities when you graduate. Yeah, maybe you'll have some bills and you'll have this, and later on you'll have potentially a family. Later on, you'll have more responsibilities with work and won't be able to travel as much or have as much time off. Later on, you'll necessarily have to have a more structured life. So right now is the time to run with that startup and try it out and fail, or take that trip and go work somewhere and learn a new language and take the time off. A gap year, again, something that makes you more interested, is seen as an advantage. It's seen as someone that is courageous enough to step out of the mold, that is driven enough to pick up their stuff and go somewhere else, and that learned stuff while being in that different position, right? So I know it feels very, very stressful, but you have the least to lose right now. So it's the time to take chances, to explore unconventional avenues, to try things for a little bit to see if you like them or not. Internships are a great way to do this. And you don't have to necessarily wait for summer or whatever, right? I have people write to me and say like, hey, I'm really interested in learning about your industry. Can I work with you? Yeah, I don't, it's volunteer work. I don't pay them, but they get to have that experience. So if you're interested in things, reach out to people, get mentors that can help you, offer help in a company that might be, say, hey, could I get involved in a project? I'm a student, I'm interested, right? It might be interesting for them because they might be training you to then graduate and come. So what I'm saying is the opportunities are out there, explore them. Don't be afraid to fail right now. Take all the risks. It's a good time to do it. Think outside the box, go out, travel, see different countries, see different cultures. It's the time to do it. And yeah, let your freak flag fly, right? Like let whatever makes you unique be a strength rather than something that you consider to be a weakness or something to be embarrassed about. It's totally the opposite. It's what's going to differentiate you from the rest, and it's what's going to make you more interesting from the crowd.
I think that's beautifully put. And especially for people in my current position and people just looking for that next step. What do I do today to start? So yet again, this has been episode 17 of the STU Street podcast. Raul, I couldn't appreciate your time more. This has been wonderful. And we are every Thursday, 5 p.m. on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So everyone make sure to check it out each week. And we have new guests on every week. So thank you.